What comes to mind when I say football? Maybe the blue and white of Argentina or the yellow of Brazil. But what about the deserts of Arabia? We know they have oil. We know they have money. But now they also have football. The Saudi Pro League is the talk of the town. They have signed some big names, and I mean big. The latest is Brazilian star Neymar. He will be playing for Hilal of the Saudi League. Guess how much he's being paid for this? $100 million per year. Sums up Saudi Arabia's plan to dominate football. Make a deal they can't refuse. Let me show you what the roster looks like. The biggest name is Cristiano Ronaldo. He plays for Al Nassr. Then you have Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante, Fabinho, Sadio Mane, Riyad Mahrez. These are all the biggest names in football. All of them play in Saudi Arabia now. And age is an issue here. Most of these players are past their prime, but Saudi Arabia would not mind that. Their primary focus is attention and popularity. Quality can follow. Just think about it. I'm sure some 20-year-old wonder kid from Brazil can outplay Mane or Ronaldo. But who would you pay to watch? A would-be talent or Cristiano Ronaldo? That's what Saudi Arabia is counting on. They have a great market for football. Around 70% of the population is under 35 years of age. They're young and they like the game. Plus, they're affluent. They can afford expensive tickets. So financially, it makes all the sense in the world. Football is part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. He wants to shift the kingdom of Saudi Arabia away from fossil fuels. Football could be one way. He has set some targets as well. One is to triple the league's market value to reach $2 billion in valuation. For context, the English Premier League is worth $17 billion, so it is a long way to go. The second target is quality. The Saudi League ranks 58th on football quality. MBS wants to break into the top 10. Again, a long way to go. But Saudi Arabia's football ambitions are not just financial, it's more political. You normally associate this country with three things: desert, oil, and a lack of human rights. MBS wants to change that perception. He wants his country to become a global stage, not just for sports, but for everything. This month, they hosted peace talks, a peace dialogue to end the war in Ukraine. Imagine that, a peace talk in Saudi Arabia. MBS wants his country to become the go-to place for football, for technology, for diplomacy, for everything. Is that really a good thing? We'll get to that question later. First, let's focus on Saudi Arabia's plan. How will they challenge the well-established leagues of Europe? They're thinking of 3 steps. They're on the first step right now, getting the big names. Unlike in Europe, Saudi Arabia does not have spending limits. It's a seemingly bottomless pit of money. Clubs can pay as much as they want. It also helps that 4 of the biggest clubs are owned by the sovereign fund, meaning the royal family. This equation helps to remove roadblocks. Consider what happened to Cristiano Ronaldo. He has a long-time partner, but he's not married to her. Now, normally Saudi Arabia would frown upon this. You can't live in with your partner in this country. But Ronaldo is doing exactly that. How is he doing it? Because the royal family has exempted him. Step number 2 is infrastructure. Top players need top stuff, whether it's gyms or stadiums or playing services, they need the best of them. Saudi Arabia is building those too. Since 2021, they have invested $6 billion on sports infrastructure. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but the Saudi Sovereign Fund manages $600 billion. They must have barely noticed the $6 billion bill. All these investments are aimed at Saudi Arabia's grand plan to host the FIFA World Cup. Reports say they could bid for the 2030 edition, the 2030 FIFA World Cup. If they do, expect Qatar on steroids. And unlike Qatar, Saudi Arabia, in fact, has a good team. They defeated Argentina in last year's World Cup, the only team to do so, which brings us to the final step, and that is appeal. People won't come just for football. They need to feel safe and welcomed in the country. How do you do that? By making footballers say and do the right things. Lionel Messi is the ambassador for Saudi tourism. Ronaldo is effectively ambassador for the Saudi League. His team won the Arab Club Championship last week. You should have seen Ronaldo's reaction. He was calling the club owners on the field, clicking pictures with them. It felt like he'd won the Champions League. And that's what Riyadh wants. The kingdom knows that there is stigma. People are apprehensive about traveling to Saudi Arabia. Unless that changes, they cannot become a footballing power. And whether you like it or not, there are two sides to this story. Saudi Arabia could make football more accessible to a lot of people. Think of Ronaldo and Ronaldo fans in Bangladesh or Indonesia. How many of them could have flown to Italy or Spain to see him play? Very few. But Saudi Arabia seems more achievable. It brings football closer to the biggest market in the world, and that market is Asia. Having said that, it's problematic too. Saudi Arabia is a closed society with few human rights. If you talk about their football, you're not talking about their rights. It's called sports washing. Using sports to cover up your problems. China does it, Qatar does it, and Saudi Arabia is doing it now. And yet there is a difference. No one is spending the sort of money that Riyadh is. And they have to. If you're challenging centuries-old football leagues, you need big pockets. You also need patience. The Premier League was not built in a day, and neither will the Saudi League. But write them off at your own risk. The world did the same during Saudi Arabia's golf takeover, and look what happened. They've effectively bought global golf. Money may not catapult Saudi Arabia to football superpowerdom, but it will make their journey a lot easier. And since we're talking about democracies in distress, let's look at what's happening in Niger. It's been a busy week for them. Militants have attacked Niger's armed forces. At least 17 soldiers have been killed. Meanwhile, the country has cut all diplomatic ties and is trying to forge new ones. It has recalled its ambassador from Ivory Coast. The new prime minister, appointed by the junta, has gone on a visit to Chad. A militia supporting the coup is beginning to take shape, and the junta chief in neighboring Mali is dropping cryptic hints about Russian support. I said a lot of developments. Also tomorrow, the generals of the West African bloc ECOWAS will meet in Ghana. They're expected to decide on the way forward. Will they attack Niger to force the military to reinstate the deposed president? A lot of geopolitical moves to track here. At the same time, the situation inside Niger is devolving into chaos. At this rate, powers outside Africa may soon get involved. Here's a report.
Niger's military ousted the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum on July 26th. They gave a host of justifications. One of the main ones was the failure in dealing with militant extremists. West Africa has been facing extremists for years now. The US and European nations partnered with governments in the region to combat the militants. But the militaries in Mali, Burkina Faso and now Niger became impatient. They said the democratic governments weren't doing enough and proceeded to conduct coups. Well, militancy hasn't gone away in West Africa, and it reared its ugly head again in Niger yesterday. It claimed the lives of 17 soldiers from Niger. This was near the border between Niger and Burkina Faso, barely 60 kilometers away from Niger's capital, Niamey. The junta claims it took down 100 of the attackers and that the threat was dealt with. But instability in the region is rising, caused by all the recent coups in West Africa. And it's creating the space for militants to regroup and expand. So the coups may be adding fuel to the fire. However, extremists aren't the only threat to Niger's junta. They also have to worry about a military intervention by ECOWAS. It's a regional bloc. ECOWAS is short for Economic Community of West African States. And the group threatened to invade if President Bazoum wasn't reinstated. The deadline was about 10 days ago. But ECOWAS hasn't marched on Niger yet. They've set up a standby force. And the military chiefs of ECOWAS nations are meeting tomorrow. But there's no definite sign of an impending intervention. There are three factors behind this. One is local sentiment. Nigeria currently chairs ECOWAS, and Nigerians, especially from the country's north, share close ties to the people of Niger. Leaders from northern Nigeria have been trying to prevent a conflict. They've been trying to deepen diplomatic channels between Niger's junta and Nigeria. The second factor pausing the military intervention is the West. The US and Europe are still holding out hope for a diplomatic solution. When the deadline to reinstate Bazoum expired, Germany and Italy appealed for calm. Yesterday, the US weighed in.
We remain very focused on diplomacy for achieving the results that we want, which is the return to the constitutional order. And I believe that there continues to be space for diplomacy in achieving that result.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there's still space for diplomacy. But the US also believes that the space is shrinking. And if Niger's junta goes through with its threat to prosecute President Bazoum for high treason, that diplomatic space may close completely. Niger's junta knows this, so it's been trying to gather allies, which is the third thing preventing the military escalation. Niger's junta already has the support of Mali and Burkina Faso. Both countries saw their own coups recently, and the military dictatorships all seem to be banding together. Niger's military leaders also seem to have the tacit support of the junta in Guinea, and now they're reaching out to Chad. Chad also saw a coup recently in 2021. And yesterday, Niger's new junta-appointed prime minister went to Chad on his first state visit. So, a bloc of coup-hit nations seems to be forming. And they seem to have one thing in common: support from Russia. Mali's junta chief, Colonel Assimi Goïta, put up this post yesterday. He said he spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin over the phone. Putin wants a peaceful resolution to the Niger crisis, which means he's against the military intervention by ECOWAS. Remember, Mali and Burkina Faso got closer to Russia after their own coups. Mali even has Russia's Wagner mercenary group operating on its soil. And with his phone call, Putin showed that he has an eye on Niger as well. So these three factors, local sentiment, the Western push for diplomacy, and the support of pro-Russia juntas in West Africa, these factors have created a tense status quo in the region. So the ECOWAS generals have to think carefully. Any change to this tenuous situation may cause West Africa to erupt in war. And it's likely that the fires won't stay in the Sahel alone.
Now let's talk about the war in Ukraine. A few weeks back, Kiev launched a counter-offensive, did not achieve very much. It has descended into a stalemate, a frozen conflict. Ukraine's Western allies see this. A few days back, they tried a peace dialogue, the one in Saudi Arabia. Again, did not achieve much. So now the Western camp seems to have changed tack. They're sending out feelers again. They want to know the cost of a settlement. What will be the price tag? If the war were to end today, what will it take? That's what the West wants to know. Perhaps a sacrifice from Ukraine. That's what they're hinting at. Ukraine should be prepared to give up land. It's a big ask, considering we know Ukraine's stated position. They want all the territory captured by Russia to be returned to them. That's what Ukraine wants. They also want a complete integration with the Western Bloc, aka full NATO membership. That is Ukraine's wish list. But is the NATO prepared for this? Unlikely if you look at their latest statement. It comes from a man called Stian Jennison, the Chief of Staff of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. He has floated a suggestion. He says Ukraine should give up some land to be able to join the NATO. A Norwegian newspaper reported these comments. We have a copy. The statement is unambiguous. Listen to what it says. I think a possible solution for Ukraine could be to give up the territory in exchange for NATO membership. I'm not saying it has to be exactly like that, but it can be a probable solution. Classic kite flying. He's also made some revelations. He said the discussions have begun, that key stakeholders in NATO are involved in these discussions. They're discussing Ukraine's prospects vis-a-vis NATO. Can it join the alliance? With what kind of status and so on? These are the questions they're deliberating upon. So will they encourage Ukraine to cede territory? Well, Jennison did not say that. He said it was up to Kiev to decide when the talks should begin, under what conditions, and what the terms of negotiation should be. But will ceding territory be a part of this conversation? Other NATO members are asking this question, at least behind closed doors. They're raising this question. What about Ukraine? What is their reaction? Kiev is obviously unhappy. It has slammed the idea. An advisor to Zelensky has called it, quote-unquote, ridiculous. Listen to the full statement. I'm quoting again. That means deliberately choosing the defeat of democracy, encouraging a global criminal, preserving the Russian regime, destroying international law, and passing the war on to other generations. That is Ukraine's response. They refuse to give up land, at least for now, and they remain stuck in the conflict. With all the Western weapons and support Ukraine has got over the last 1 year, it has not been able to make the gains it hoped to. The likes of America are now saying this openly. Last month, the Pentagon said that Ukraine's counteroffensive is moving slowly.
Things are going a little slower than some had hoped. There are very high expenditures of artillery right.
Despite this assessment, they gave more support to Kiev. In fact, the US made a controversial move. It gave cluster bombs to Ukraine. Even that did not help. The West wanted to see gains on the battlefield. So far, they've given more than $80 billion in military assistance to Kiev. But look at the map of Ukraine. It hasn't changed very much. Russia still controls about 11% of Ukrainian territory. After the much-hyped counteroffensive, Ukraine has managed to regain only 3% of the lost land. And the big prizes still remain with Russia: Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and most of the Donbas region, all under Russian control. The counteroffensive was supposed to change this map. It was supposed to force the Kremlin to the negotiating table. That has not happened. Now, the West cannot keep signing blank checks. They will have to reassess their options. Zelensky may want to keep the war going. He may even want to launch another counteroffensive next spring. But will his allies support him? The US is already under pressure. Recently, a poll was conducted. Americans were asked about their government aid to Ukraine. The results are telling. 55% Americans oppose the idea of more aid. They did not want more American money to be spent on this war in Ukraine. That's a worry for Kiev and an opportunity for Moscow. They're holding a defense exhibition as we speak. It's happening in Kubinka. Among the exhibits is this: Western weapons apparently seized by Russian forces in the battlefield. They look heavily damaged. The Russian defense minister who was at this event had this to say about these weapons.
As for the Western-made weapons supplied to Ukraine, I want to emphasize once again that there is nothing unique and invulnerable about them to Russian weapons on the battlefield today. In many cases, even Soviet-made equipment surpasses Western models in its combat qualities.
So Russia is building a new narrative and Ukraine is struggling on the battlefield. Is Zelensky prepared to sacrifice territory to join the NATO? A lot will depend on how his forces perform in the days ahead. The future is electric. How many times have we heard that? Too many in the last decade. But when will that future arrive? I ask because electric vehicle companies are making a splash, and quite a big one too. The latest is VinFast. It's a Vietnamese EV maker. It is owned by the country's richest man. VinFast debuted on the Wall Street this week. It was a blockbuster debut. The company's shares closed around 270% up on Tuesday. 270%. The initial offer price was $10. It opened at $22 and it closed at $37. It is indeed a dream debut, but this story is not about VinFast, it's about the auto industry in general. How it is changing from fossil fuels to electric, that's what we want to track. Let's stick to VinFast for a bit. After Tuesday's debut, the company's market capitalization reached $85 billion. Compare that to other car makers. Ford is at $48 billion. General Motors is at $43 billion. These are the biggest car makers in the US. They mostly sell gasoline cars. But their market cap is half of VinFast. What does that tell you? The future is indeed electric. These valuations are not based on sales or profits. They're based on expectations. Expectations that the future is electric. Let me explain with an example. We will look at Tesla and Toyota. One is the largest EV maker. The other is the largest overall. How many vehicles did Toyota sell last year? Around 10.5 million. What about Tesla? Just 1 million. So Toyota's sales are 10 times more. Now let's look at profits. Toyota made $18 billion last year and Tesla around $12 billion. Toyota's market cap is around $220 billion. And Tesla is more than 3 times that. Tesla's market cap is around $715 billion. So even the market thinks that the future is electric. There are 2 reasons for that. Number one is climate change. Countries have committed to net zero emissions. You can't achieve those without fuel cars, or with fuel cars rather. So the plan is to phase them out. Even India is looking at doing that. A government panel has proposed banning diesel cars by 2027, but the centre is yet to accept it. If fuel cars leave the market, buyers will not have an option. It's either electric or nothing. Reason number 2 is cost. Electric vehicles are more expensive to buy, but their running cost is less. The average cost of a petrol car in India is 8 to 10 rupees per kilometre. That's the average, 8 to 10 rupees per kilometre. What about EVs? Just 1 to 2 rupees. So in the long run, you will end up saving more. You also get tax SOPs and subsidies for buying electric vehicles. So why aren't more people buying them? Well, if you look around, there aren't many options. That's one problem. Here in India, the average price tag of cars is around 7 lakhs. It's the national average, 7 lakh rupees. But a Tesla, if it comes to India, will cost you somewhere close to 50 lakh rupees. There is simply no comparison. The other problem is charging. You may spend around 5 to 10 minutes at the gas station, but EV charging takes a lot more. And to make things worse, there are fewer stations. India has around 7,000 EV charging stations. Compare that to petrol pumps. We have around 80,000 of them. So infrastructure is key, but chances are the world will come around. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. If you don't believe me, just look at the Germans. They're supposed to be the best car makers in the world, but even the Germans are going electric. BMW says EVs will make up 50% of their sales before 2030. Audi is launching 10 EV models by 2026, and Mercedes is planning to go 100% electric by 2030. So the writing is on the wall. Both customers and car makers realize this. In 2020, just 5% of the cars sold were EVs. In 2021, it was 9%. And last year, 14%. This is massive growth for any industry. The likes of Tesla and VinFast have a head start here, hence the higher valuation. But the traditional car makers are catching up. When they do, things will get more interesting. Will the sky-high valuations remain, or will they be cut to size? Either way, India too needs to think about EVs. We have dozens of startups focusing on this technology, but let's face it, it's a long shot. You need scale to succeed in the auto market. Some Indian companies are making an effort. Mahindra, for instance, is launching 16 EV models by 2027. Tata says half of their sales by 2030 will come from electric vehicles. The idea is to make them affordable and efficient. But all of this falls flat if the government does not get on board. There is no point using an EV if electricity is coming from a coal power plant. You need green power. You need more chargers. Only then will the future be electric. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We are starting with India. Nature's fury is wreaking havoc in the state of Himachal Pradesh. Heavy rains and landslides led houses to collapse. In Spain, a massive wildfire is burning across the Canary Island. The situation on the ground has gone from bad to worse. In Italy, sudden flooding caused an alpine stream to burst its banks. 6 people have been rescued. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1977, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, died. He was just 42 years old when he died because of a heart attack, but his melodies and his flamboyant personality lived on. We are leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Niger.